I was a little kid when this happened. I lived in a small town in England, and we didn't have a cinema for quite a while. So when one opened, it was a novelty, and my mom would take me a lot. It's different now, and it's been expanded, but back then there were 5 screens, 3 larger ones and then 2 small ones down towards the end of the building and down a long corridor, and then a thinner corridor spanned off from that, leading to the 2 bathrooms, men's and women's. So I forget which film we were there to see, but this was before the film started. I needed to use the bathroom, but I had a drink and popcorn and I didn't want to take them into the bathroom with me. Mom was chatting to a friend who worked at the cinema, so I was just hanging out at the start of the corridor leading to the bathrooms, waiting impatiently. Just to clarify, though, I was maybe 7 here, so hanging around outside the bathrooms didn't make me look like a weirdo. I'm there waiting for Mom to show up, eating little bits of popcorn while I wait, when I see him. A huge tall guy in a long waxed raincoat. I'm not sure if they're popular in the States, but here when I was a kid they were called yuppie coats in my area. Very dark green long raincoats made of thick canvas materials. I guess rich people originally wore them, but now they were just typical outdoor coats. So this guy was wearing that and had longish hair, and he looked maybe in his 50s or older, and now I'll just reiterate here, this was back in the 90s, so it was before the popularity of gender fluidity and non-binary identities and whatnot. If you were trans, then you dressed, often as a requirement for gender-affirming treatment, as the gender you wanted to be. Not my words, just trying to explain it. And the point is, this was a man. He was not making any attempts to appear as anything but a man. And he walked straight down the bathroom corridor and into the ladies' toilets. I knew something felt very wrong about this, so I kept watching the door, and thankfully Mom showed up seconds later. I told her what I'd seen, and she immediately went to get a cinema employee. During this time, I did not move from my spot looking down the corridor. If this man had left the ladies' room, I would have seen him. So Mom gets back with the female cinema employee who goes into the bathroom, and she comes out a few minutes later looking at me strangely. There was no tall, hefty guy in a raincoat here. In fact, there was nobody in the bathroom at all. It was entirely empty. She asked me if maybe I'd been mistaken and he'd gone into the men's. I said I didn't think so. She knocked on the men's and then called in, and when there was no answer, opened the door, and the men's bathroom was empty too. She asked me if there was any chance that the man had left the bathroom in the meantime, and I assured her that it was totally, utterly impossible, and I meant it. I don't know for sure what happened that day. What I do know is that I 100% definitely saw a large man go into the ladies' bathroom, and then the bathroom was empty the next time someone went into it. I am certain that he didn't leave through the door, or realize that he'd gone into the wrong bathroom and switched to the men's. I was watching intently because the whole thing obviously creeped me out. What I do know, though, is that a couple of years later, the part of the ceiling of the cinema collapsed while people were in one of the screens watching a movie. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but it turned out there was a huge amount of space at the top of the building that spanned most of the area, and that it hadn't been constructed very well, apparently, since it eventually collapsed. I know I saw a large, creepy-looking guy go into that bathroom, and I know he then disappeared. My theory is that he somehow knew how to get into the crawl space through a ceiling vent, and then went off and did something. What and why, I don't know. It's either that or my local cinema, which is still there to this day, albeit very much refurbished and higher quality, with a fixed ceiling, is haunted by the ghost of a large man who hangs around the bathrooms. And honestly, I don't know which theory I prefer. His name was Sean, and I met him on Tinder. I won't say it was love at first sight. It took a bit of cajoling from him to get me to agree to a date. He wasn't really my type. Kinda looked like he loved himself, a tall and buff guy. I'm usually into slightly pudgier guys who, well, I'm sure you don't care about that. But trust me, fellas, women who like normal guys are out there. And Sean won me over with a sense of humor, his smooth talking, and his absolute geekery. I'm a big Marvel fan, or, well, I was back then anyway, and I went to all the movies in the theater on opening weekend whenever possible. I was also really big into horror, especially the Conjuring universe, so Sean eventually won me over by inviting me to go with him to see The Nun. Hey, The movies are a pretty easy place for a first date. If it's going badly, you can just sort of shift away in your seat and ignore the other person for the duration of the film. He picked me up at a nearby Starbucks. Don't give random Tinder dates your address, people. And we drove to the theater. And honestly, he was great. Really charming, fun, and generally a good time. He knew his movies too. A nerd in a sort of cute way, which is basically just to say that he's a nerd. Now the one problem was, he was fairly pessimistic about the prospects for The Nun. I'll give him this. He ended up being right. Man, that movie sucked. And let's not even mention the sequel, but this isn't about that. Sean was certain that the first movie was going to suck, even though we were going on opening night, and he was promising me that he had something in mind that would make the experience way more memorable, quote-unquote. Well, here we go, I was thinking. He's going to make sure that we get seats in the back row, and I'm going to be in for an evening of dodging make-out attempts and groping hands. Still, I wasn't too dissuaded by the former, at least. If only that's what Sean had planned, though. We grabbed our tickets and some popcorn and even a hot dog. Sean was against the idea of buying a drink, though. According to him, needing to leave the theater to use the bathroom ruined any movie. I mean, I guess I could buy that. I did miss a key scene in The Dark Knight thanks to a bathroom break, but it is a bit psychotic with salty popcorn. And sure enough, when he led us into the theater, he headed straight for the back row. We'd arrived very early for the showing, and it was one of those small-town theaters where you just kind of chose whatever seats were available. He led us down the aisle of the back row until we were basically in the middle looking down at the screen. It was a prime spot, in fairness, and I was fine with the seating arrangement. We sat there making small talk, laughing at the ads and then watching the trailers quietly like good moviegoers should. Then the lights dimmed. Sean finished his hot dog, and he positioned the popcorn between us, and our hands brushed a couple of times as we shared the salted goodness. And I even felt a bit of a spark there. The movie started off not too bad. I was kind of enjoying it, honestly. Thaisa Farmiga can win me over very easily. But Sean, however, was not enjoying it. He kept nudging me, making whispered comments about how crappy it was and how it could use some extra scares. I mostly just ignored him because, honestly, I was enjoying it and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And then he told me to look down. At the same time, I felt something prodding into my side. Sean was sitting on my left, and other than an elderly couple at the end of the row on the right, we had the whole line to ourselves. I looked down. Sean was holding the biggest hunting knife I had ever seen, and the tip of it was very slightly pressed into my side. I remember his words like it was yesterday. Move, or call for help, or do anything, and the blade goes in. He said, just keep watching the movie. And so we did. And throughout, he kept making goofy remarks and joking comments as if he didn't have a huge knife held against me. And I was absolutely trembling, terrified and speechless with fear almost. At times I had to stifle back sobs as I replied to his inane jibes at the movie. At this point, I had no idea if he'd lose his mind in anger if I disagreed with him calling the movie garbage or something. I mean, it kinda was, and it got worse as it went on, but obviously I didn't really care at that point. And at that point I was just begging for it to be over. Scenarios were running through my head. What would happen when the credits rolled? Would he expect us to just walk out like nothing had happened? Would I be getting a blade to the gut? I understood now why he'd forbidden us from getting a soda. Not only could it have required me to get up, but it would have improved the chances of me actually pissing myself in fear. I genuinely cannot express to you the terror of sitting there for 90 minutes with a blade gently pushing into the soft flesh of my stomach. I wanted to do something. I knew if I called out for help, he'd be able to gut me before I could receive so much as a look of concern from fellow moviegoers. And then, thank God, the movie was over. We sat there for a moment, and the credits were rolling, and the knife was still pressing into me. The theater lights went up, and that's when I saw it. It was a literal prop knife. Now, before you think I'm some idiot, it was a professional-level movie prop, I'll be honest. He must have paid top dollar for it, and I could only tell because in the light I could see the official Rob Zombie's Halloween movie branding on the handle. I guess it explained how he held it steady enough that it felt like it could penetrate me at any moment, but never did. And Sean was grinning at me like he'd just given me the world's best treat. "There, didn't I make a terrible movie a hell of a lot scarier?" he said. When he saw the absolute murderous rage on my face, I could tell he was genuinely surprised. This idiot, this moron idiot jackass, had genuinely believed that just because I was a horror fan, I'd be delighted and grateful at him causing me one of the worst hours of my entire life. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I know it was far too obscene to share on this channel, and I also know it resulted in me throwing the rest of the popcorn straight in his smug, idiot face. And most of it was still untouched due to me fearing for my life. I stormed straight out of that movie theater, told the manager, who was a friend of mine, and obviously was advised to call the cops. There was barely a charge in response, something to do with causing undue stress, but due to the stupid way the laws worked at the time, the low lighting didn't make the charge worse, and the fact that it was an obvious toy made it harder to push for anything more serious. I did make sure to press charges, but he ended up getting off with some slap on the wrist. Thankfully, a very sympathetic judge granted me a restraining order, not that I think I had any danger of hearing from Sean again, and in his eyes, I was the crazy, hysterical woman who couldn't handle being an actual horror fan, all because I wasn't cool with having to spend the duration of that movie thinking that I was going to get stabbed to death. And so, Sean, screw you. I hope the possessed doll of Annabelle eats you in your sleep. So some years ago, I worked as a cleaner at a local, reasonably large theater in my city. Things weren't as bad back then as they are now, but holy gosh darn, even back before the old Rona, theatergoers were just filthy animals. And sometimes it was fine, but on an average Friday night showing, I'd spend hours cleaning up copious amounts of popcorn, spilled soda, candy, and chocolate wrappers, melted chocolate bars, all sorts. And sometimes it would be things that we didn't even sell. I once found a seat stuck together by a full, untouched bologna sandwich, and I swear I'd watch the theatergoers head into the movie, and there would be more food to clean up than they took with them in the first place. And that was the good times. You don't even know what the amount of vile, unspeakable things that I had to scrub away with the aid of rubber gloves, a hard-bristled brush, and industrial-strength detergent. Let's just say, people are disgusting, yo. I guess it came as a shock at first, 'cause my mama raised me right and good and taught me to clean up after my own damn self. And we also grew up poor, and me and my mother and younger brother Tyrell, so if I bought a hot dog, then I was damn well gonna eat that hot dog, not just squash it into a cup holder. Now, believe it or not though, the disgusting hygiene and cleanliness of others isn't the point of this scary story. It's about one night when I was working very late. I think it was a midnight showing of Hereditary. Midnight showings at our theater actually meant that it hit midnight around the halfway point, so by the time the movie was done and everyone had filed out, I was there to clean up close to 2 a.m. Thankfully, it didn't seem too chaotic. I went about my business with my trash bag, my little grabby claw, and my bucket on wheels filled with the usual equipment. And so movie theaters get lit up after a movie's been shown, right? Well, in our movie theater anyways, after a midnight showing, they just kind of kept the lights dim. I guess they were just too cheap to give the poor cleaning girl full clear vision, who knows. But I was cool with it. I'd caught the tail end of the movie and it gave me the spook, so I was kind of enjoying the atmosphere of a half-lit movie theater as I went about cleaning up. Then movement caught my eye. Something sort of skittering across the aisle near the front, from one row to the other side, and I say this like a spider, but it was the size of a human being, like someone had rapidly crawled from one side of row C to the other. Anyone there?" I called out, praying to the Lord above that there wouldn't be a reply. And there wasn't, of course. There must have been my imagination, I guess, so I just went back to cleaning. And then, no mistaking it, rustling from near aisle E, the sound of popcorn crunching underfoot, and I'd know that sound anywhere. What the hell should I do, I thought. I had no idea who was left in that theater that late at night, and for all I knew, it was just me and our old-ass manager. I heard a sound from across the theater. It was hard to tell in the gloom, but it looked like someone had thrown a soda cup across the room. Then, while my gaze was pointed in that direction, a shadow darted over the seats near the front of the screen. More crunching sounds, and then suddenly silence. I began to creep slowly as I could toward the exit door, and for a moment, I thought I'd screwed myself when my shoe got stuck on some sticky soda spill, and I grabbed the sheet, shaking it somewhat. There was silence, and I made it almost to the exit. And then I heard more skittering lower down the room. I stayed very still, waiting, pretending like I'd left. A shape crawled along the aisle, and this time I saw them very clearly. It was a person, a thin, emaciated-looking person, dragging themselves commando-style across the aisle. Oh, hell no. Hell to the no. I wasn't sticking around for this. "I'm just gonna back out real slowly," I called out into the darkness. But a voice spoke back. I have no idea what she said. It was in a language that I honestly couldn't really tell what it was, and it didn't sound threatening though, almost scared. Now I called out asking if the person was okay, but no reply. But I could hear them moving around, and it sounded like they were getting closer, and I didn't like that. My plan was to leave and call the cops, but then that figure, the person, fully leaped over the seats, hurtling forward over the next aisle too, leaping straight for me. They were yelling something I couldn't understand, but they didn't sound scared anymore. I kind of froze, not sure which direction to go. Right would lead me to the aisle and let me leave the theater, but in the half-darkness, this figure charging at me, leaping over chairs, I was not thinking straight. When she was just an aisle away, I saw that she was some Caucasian girl, looked like a teenager. She had short, filthy blonde hair, her face was dirty, and she had ketchup and mustard smeared around her mouth. This young white lady had been crawling around eating the vile leftovers off the theater floor. It's funny how your mind acts in a pinch, because my immediate thought was pity for this hungry, emaciated teenager, and like I said, I grew up poor and I sympathized. But my moment of empathy caused me to freeze, and she leaped over the final aisle and was on top of me. I don't think she wanted to hurt me. I think she just hadn't understood me and wanted to make sure that she could escape without me somehow restraining her. But still, she threw me back against the seat hard, and I heard my spine even crack in a way that made me wince. Now don't worry, I'm fine. It was just kind of like cracking a knuckle, as it turns out. And then this chick was sort of shaking me, spit flying onto my face. She's kind of yelling, sort of begging in whatever language she was talking in, and so I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed her head with both my hands and turned her face toward a whole pile of popcorn on the floor and just yelled, "Eat it," hoping that she'd get the point that I was just going to let her. And she did. She jumped off of me, went toward that popcorn, and just began pouring it into her own face. Now this psycho had scared me, but I didn't have it in my heart to get some teenage runaway busted by the cops. And maybe this was a dumb idea, but you hear about young girls running away like this for a good reason, and then end up being sent back to places that ruin them forever. So I let her eat for a minute, and then just kind of poked her gently with my trash grabber claw. "Hey, you gotta go," I told her, gesturing at the exit door at the back which led outside. She starts shaking her head and just kept shoveling that popcorn into her mouth. "My boss is gonna be here any minute, you gotta go," I said, gesturing again, hoping she understood enough English to at least comprehend what I was saying. And I guess she did, because she takes one final scoop of popcorn and then just starts running towards the exit door. And it was only later that I realized how much damn danger I just put myself in and how potentially stupid I'd been in that moment. I never told anyone about this incident, but I had nightmares about it for weeks. Only in those nightmares, she wasn't some harmless girl from Eastern Europe or wherever she was from. She was a demon crawling between the aisles, eating its way through the seats. I'm pretty sure I even saw her again once. It was a couple of years later, shortly before I left the theater to move on to bigger, better things. And she was there on, I guess, a date? The guy she was with, he didn't look like a good kind of person, not at all. And I guess you shouldn't just judge a book by its cover, but he gave me really bad vibes. And to this day I wonder if he was someone that she met on the streets or someone she'd been sent back home to. All I know is cleaning movie theaters at night can be a freaking terrifying thing. I see the TikToks and the YouTube shorts of the way people leave things, and I just sort of laugh because, girls, if that's as bad as it gets for you, then you're lucky. Because I learned that day, sometimes there's more to be afraid of than finding a squished hot dog in your theater aisle.